Hey, boys and girls, Mrs. Marlin here. We are going to start our end of the quarter writing for quarter one. All right. And it is called a performance task. And that sounds like a really weird name for a writing assignment, but that's what it's called. And it's one of those assignments that everybody in Greater Clark has to do. Okay, Greater Clark Star School System, and that it's something everybody has to do. All right, so we're going to start by going over this slideshow together, and then we're going to talk about what your job is going to be. Okay, so our first day, we're going to talk about our task or our job, and we're going to take some notes. This tells us what the reason why we have to do this. It's going to show what we've learned. This first one we're going to do together, and then the rest of them at the end of the other quarters, you're going to do them by yourself. Okay, so it's going to be important you pay attention to this one that we're doing together so that you know what to do when it's time to do it by yourself. This first performance task today is that we're going to start today is a narrative. We've been talking about narratives, and this is going to be a story. All right. Now, this will not be a story about your life. This is a story about another child's life, and we're going to talk about that. These are some things you're going to want to remember about narrative writing. You're going to start with an opening. You're going to have some characters and events. You'll have a setting. You're going to have a sequence of events. Remember those sequencing words we talked about? First, next, last. You could have some dialogue. And remember, dialogue is people talking, characters talking. You're going to stay focused, and your story needs to make sense. You're going to use details. You'll have some kind of point of view. And of course, you're going to have correct spelling, punctuation, capitalization, and grammar. All right, so here's your assignment. This is your writing assignment for this performance task. This school year, your class has been writing to pen pals from a third grade class across the country. Your class has been studying the lives of the early Northwest Coast Indians who lived in the Pacific Northwest. Don't be stressed out about all that. We're going to do this one together. I feel like that seems like a lot. Your assignment is to write a narrative story about one day in the life of a Northwest Coast Indian your age. So you're going to write about a day in the life of a child your age before the European settlers arrived. You will send your story to your pen pal, okay? So you're going to be writing a story about a day in the life of another third grader, okay? To do this, you're going to first watch a video. At the end of this video, you're going to start by watching a video that I have posted under this assignment. We're going to read some articles together, and then we're going to come up with some ideas and discuss some things that you learned about the daily life of the Northwest Coast Indian. Okay? And then lastly, you're going to reread the article. We'll take some notes. Let's start by pausing here. I want you to pause this video right here, right now. And I want you to jump over to our classroom and watch the 2-minute video that I posted about the Native Americans. Okay, so as I was watching the video, I took some notes from the video. You do not have to write this down. This is also posted in our classroom, okay? These are some notes that are going to help me write about the day in the life of a Native American child, okay? These are some ideas I have. It said they lived in plank houses. They used cedar wood for a lot of things. They were wood carvers. They made totem poles. I thought this was really interesting. They didn't farm. They ate salmon, fish, and seals. They didn't eat bread because they didn't grow corn. They wore cedar tree clothing and basket hats, and they thought many gods controlled the earth. Okay? Now, again, these notes are posted because we're doing this together. Now, we have some articles we're going to read together, and these articles are going to help us and teach us about a day in the life of an early Northwest Coast Indian. All right? While I'm reading this, I'm going to use my highlighter to highlight important parts. Boys and girls, this is posted in our classroom under the assignment. These articles we're getting ready to read. We're doing this part together. The question is what you have to answer that's posted as a document, okay? This part is just for you to look at. Okay, so here are the student directions. We've already talked a little bit about this. Living as an early Northwest Coast Indian narrative performance task. Okay. This year, your class has been writing to pen pals from the third grade class in Yakima, Washington. And there's Yakima, Washington. It is up in the up in the top left-hand corner, the northwest corner of the United States. Your pen pals have been studying about the tribe. To share your learning, your teacher asks you to write a narrative story about one day in the life of a Northwest Coast Indian your age. You will send the story to your pen pals. After you look at these sources, you're going to answer a question. You're going to use the sources to answer the question and then go back for more information before you write your story. Okay? So today we're reading the information to learn about the life of a Northwest Coast Indian. All right? Tomorrow you're going to write your story based on the information. Okay? Here is our first source. Now I'm going to highlight this word source because that's a fancy word. All that means, that's another word for article, story, information. Okay, don't be tricked by that word. That's what that means, an article, a story, information. All right? And you can check this out as often as you like. You can check this out as often as you like. All right? After looking at the source, use the rest of your time in part 1 to answer the question. Your answer will be scored. Your answer will help you think about the information you have read and looked at, which will help you write your story. Okay, you may look back at your notes, answer the question in the space provided. Okay, here we go. Source 1. This passage is about the daily life of early Northwest Coast Indians. So this is going to help you know what to write about. Life of early Northwest Coast Indians. What was the land like? The Northwest Coast region of North America is a land of mist and rain. So it's very misty and rainy there. That seems important to me, so I'm going to give that a highlight. Few days are really hot or really cold. Most days, however, are wet. Trees grow tall and forests are lush with moss. From almost everywhere, you can hear the sound of rushing water. The native people who settled here at least 8,000 years ago formed many tribes. Before these people met the Europeans, they had a very unique way of life. They lived completely off the natural resources around them to help them meet their needs and wants. Read on to find out what life was like for these early Northwest Coast Indians. Native Americans of the Northwest Coast didn't farm. We talked about that from the video. They didn't have to. The forests were full of nuts, berries, and animals to hunt. That's new information. The rivers were full of salmon. Talked about that in the video. Their main food and other fish. People get food from the ocean as well. They caught big fish such as halibut. They even hunted walruses, seals, and whales. So that's going to be pretty important for our story. If we're going to talk about the day in the life, we need to know what they eat. All right, let's keep going. To cook, the Indians smoked their salmon over their fires, roasted food over an open fire, or cooked in a large pit dug in the ground that worked just like an oven. What did their houses look like? Many people think all Indians lived in teepees made from animal skins, but this is not true. The Northwest Coast Indians did not live in teepees because the climate was so wet. The animal skin teepees would not have kept them dry in the heavy rain. So what did they live in? Trees were plentiful in the early Northwest Coast Indians. Did not have to move around a lot to follow animals. So they built houses out of cedar wood. They talked about that in the video we watched. One house might be as big as 80 feet tall and 50 feet wide, and it only had one very large room. Each house had several levels of sleeping stalls along the walls. In the middle of the room was a fire pit, and there was a hole in the roof to let out the smoke. All the people in the house belonged to the same clan. This means they shared ancestors. Can you imagine trying to sleep with 50 or 60 of your closest family members all sleeping in the same room? So all people in the same clan both shared the same house. What did they wear? The Indians of the Pacific Northwest even made clothing out of cedar trees. Not the hard bark on the outside of the trunk, but the soft, thin bark underneath. They didn't need much to stay warm, but they did need to stay dry. They made clothing out of cedar trees. Early Northwest Coast Indians wove capes and skirts from cedar bark that were water repellent. That's important. They also made cone-shaped hats that worked like umbrellas. All right, so we learned about what they would eat, what their houses looked like, and what they wear. How did they travel? There were no roads and no cars, planes, or trains at the time of the early Northwest Coast Indians, but they did have many waterways in the area. The Indians built large and long canoes from cedar trees to travel these waterways. So the Indians built large and long canoes from the cedar trees to travel these waterways. So they really used these cedar trees a lot. Some canoes were up to 50 feet long and 8 feet wide. Each canoe could hold between 2 and 50 people and 10,000 pounds of cargo, such as fish at one time. They also had smaller boats for single families or short day outings. All right, so I'm thinking right now about what they ate. They ate a lot of salmon from the water. Their houses were made out of cedar wood so they could stay dry. They all people in their house belonged to the same clan. They made clothing out of cedar trees because it was water repellent, which means it kept the water off of them. They made cone-shaped hats because they worked like umbrellas. And they made canoes out of cedar trees. All right, what kind of work did they do? Every member in the Northwest Coast community had jobs to do. Northwest Coast Indian children were taught early on about the roles they would take on as adults, usually by observing their parents. On a typical day, a girl, for example, would learn about collecting berries and weaving cedar bark mats by watching and helping her mother. So do you think that's going to be pretty important whenever it comes to how they spent their day and writing about their day? Yeah, I think so, especially if you're writing about a little girl. Now, boys at a young age as young as the age 6, started fishing and hunting with their father. So that's going to be really important if you're a boy and you're talking about a day in the life. During the winter months, they might help the men carve items such as tools in small canoes. So that's basically how they spent their day, boys and girls. That's going to really help you. Elders or older people would also teach girls and boys about the family history and how to behave by telling the tribe's old stories. Families were very important to Northwest Coast Indians. Okay. Now, I'm going to pause for just a second. All right. So we have these notes about how they lived, what they ate, what they wore. And we have the notes that we just highlighted. I'm going to kind of make some notes over to the side. They ate salmon. They hunted animals. Seals. Whales. That's what they would eat. That's going to be important. They made their houses out of cedar wood. Let me make a note of that. I'm starting to think how that can be important. They made their clothing out of cedar trees. Obviously, they had a lot of cedar trees. They traveled in canoes made out of cedar trees. The kind of work. Girls collected berries. Boys would fish and hunt. Okay, so we've got a lot of good information here. Now, your job today is going to go to the document and answer this question. According to the passage, Life of the Early Northwest Coast Indians, how did the Indians use the land to meet their needs? The first thing that's popping in my head, boys and girls, are what kind of trees? Cedar trees. Use at least 2 details from the passage to support your answer. Write your answer in the space provided. Okay. So I'm going to start at the very beginning, and I'm going to say, the early Northwest Coast Indians used cedar trees, that's the land, to meet their needs. Now, I got to tell 2 ways they do this. I can look back at my notes. Let's look back at our notes of what we highlighted. Let's see. Oh, I remember. They made their houses out of cedar wood from cedar trees because it kept them dry. They made their houses out of cedar wood because it kept them dry. They also wore clothing made out of cedar trees, but I think I'm going to talk about the canoes. Could you talk about what they wore? Yes, I'm choosing to talk about the canoes. They used cedar trees to build canoes so they could travel. They also used cedar trees to build canoes so they could travel. All right, did I give 2 details? Let's see. I talked about their houses. and I talked about how they built canoes. So yes, I am finished with this question. Your assignment now is to go answer this question on the document and turn it in.